laws is a cause. Too many laws and also senseless laws. When you have those together, then you breed corruption. Give you an example. This is another example that we had to go through. My current company is a skincare company. Skin is skin. So for that, we have to import some ingredients because if you don't have the, you need the inputs that you need at the standard of quality that you need them in order to remain competitive in your marketplace. My marketplace is the United States. That's where the people have the money to spend all of this, to spend on our products. They understand our products. This is just, it's one of the best markets for us for many different reasons. We sell at places like Whole Foods Market. I don't have to tell you, it's one of the most beautiful chains of grocery stores in the US. You can imagine that the buyers are super sophisticated and they don't just bring any product in that chain, but they bring us. So, which tells you the level of standard we're playing at with world class. So it means that everything behind the scene has to be world class. The whole chain up and down has to be world class. And so ingredients, no different. So we had to bring in some ingredients. Well, guess what, Jordan? For some of my ingredients, the tariff is 45% to enter the country, 45%. Others, almost 70%. How do you expect me to be competitive if you're slapping such tariff on some of my inputs? How? Because for every 50 cents you add on tariffs, I have to sell my products $2 more than I would have in order for me to actually make it. I become very uncompetitive very quickly, quality for quality, product for product. So there we had to, so now, if instead of making it a 45%, how about maybe it's a 0% like it is in the US? If I had to bring the same product here in the US, 0% tariff on it. Or make it 5% or 2%, 3%, something that makes sense. So then do you really think that I'm going to try to jump through the hoops of avoiding that 45% or that 70%? There's no need. Pay it and move on because you've got better things to do. See how bad laws and senseless laws breed corruption because people will then, it is cheaper and faster for people to pay the bribe and move on than to adhere to the law. You see? So that's what we have inherited in most African nations. As I noticed, the discrepancy and the difference between doing business back home and doing business in the United States. At first I was like, oh, well, of course it's like this. It's just because, we're a poor nation, we're messed up, and that's why everything else is messed up. And then eventually, I started to really think about it, to think it through. And it's around the same time that God, again, brought some interesting people in my life. Because at that time, my company, my first company at least, was, now I had moved into the nonprofit. We had started a nonprofit because my goal was, how can I help replicate whatever success I was able to have? How can I help many other magats or my male counterparts from Africa do exactly what I did with whatever product they deemed to do it with? How could I help with that? And it is during that journey that I eventually even learned about the work of Hernando de Soto. And when I heard about his work, he was right there telling me, Magat, what you went through, what you're going through, experientially speaking, is not an anecdote. This is something very systemic about this. And it is called economic freedom. How easy or hard it is to do a business. You have indexes that measure this. The most known of them being the Doing Business Index ranking of the World Bank. And then you have a Fraser Institute Economic Freedom Index as well, and others and others. Well, what do they all have in common? They all show you one after the other that it is harder to do business in anywhere in sub-Saharan Africa than it is anywhere in Scandinavia. And I take Scandinavia purposely because people who are anti-business, they need to know that Scandinavia is more business friendly, is more pro-capitalist, I'll use the dirty word, than almost any sub-Saharan African nation. And
Right, and so the Scandinavian choice is a very interesting one because the rabid and idiot anti-capitalists of the West often point to Scandinavia as socialist countries. But as you point out, they're socialist on the edges and capitalist at the core and in a very, very effective and efficient manner. And so they are business friendly in precisely the manner that you described. And those principles that you elucidated minimum necessary laws. That's part of the English common law tradition. Yep. Minimum necessary force of enforcement. That's another good one.
Yep.
And what is it?
Clear,
I think this was Montaigne.
And you also have clear and transferable property rights, and you also have the concept of a rule of law as well.
Right. So those are some of the metaphysical and legislative substrates that make a free enterprise system possible. Because people often also think about only the market working, but you need a set of regulations and also customs that the free market can run on top of, like an operating system.
Exactly. Yeah. And I love that you're using the word operating system, because this is going to take us to something else. But before we go any further, I want to point that as I was learning from the work of people like Hernando de Soto, as I was learning from people like the man who became my husband, I like to joke and say, he brought me the answer to my little girl's question. I rewarded him with love, so I married him. As I was looking at the work of people like him, Michael Strong, people like John Mackey of Whole Foods Market, they're friends, so that's how I got to know John. But they made me really get into a whole nother world of people who truly care. But what was different about these people is that they cared not on their own terms. They cared, but on the terms of the truth. And we might go into that at some point, but let me just keep it there. So what happened in that time of my life, as I was trying to see how can I multiply my whatever success, I found out the answer. I started to connect the dots, and I learned that eventually, wow. So you're poor because you have no money because no source of income. A source of income for most of us is a job. Where do jobs come from? The private sector, businesses, especially small and medium-sized enterprises. Then shouldn't we think about the environment of those businesses in which they get to thrive or not? I think we do. But then when I look there and I look at these indexes, they're all telling me one thing and one thing only is, your region is the poorest in the world because it happens to be the most over-regulated in the world, meaning that as many people fight for freedom and supposedly fight for Africa's rights, no one thought about one of the most important of rights and freedoms after you have managed human rights in its global way, economic freedom.
Well, you list here in one of your articles where you make reference to these rating systems, the bottom 10 countries for doing business in the world: Chad, Haiti,